Recently, I was looking at a research which was just fascinating. It looked at 15,000 leaders, over 300 different organizations for 18 years. And here's what they found, that there was one leadership skill that increased performance by 40%. Yes, 40%. You want to know what that skill is? Empathy. That's right, leaders with higher levels of empathy performed 40% better than others. So today we're going to look at this concept of empathy and what it means for us as leaders. So it's important to ask, what is empathy? How do we know what empathy is? Well, empathy is this ability. It's this ability to move into the emotions of another person. It's ability to feel what they are feeling, to know what they are feeling. In many ways, we use the terms to walk in another person's shoes or to see the world through another person's eyes. It's also important to look at the actual etymology of the word empathy because it really gives us a clue into what empathy is. Empathy comes from, first of all, the Greek word pathos, which is in feeling, to feel in. You feel that movement? You're moving into another person's feeling. Also, in the English, it comes from the German Einfühlung, to feel in. So empathy has this movement towards the other person. Now, when it comes to breaking down what empathy really is, I think what I'm going to do is turn to the work of Dr. Paul Ekman. He's one of the leading psychologists who has really focused his whole life's research on emotions. And he breaks it down into three different types of empathy. So let's look at those three different types, how they show up, and how we might be able to identify them. And then we're going to finish today by looking at some of the behaviors you might see if someone doesn't have enough empathy or someone has too much empathy. The first empathy is cognitive empathy. Now, cognitive empathy, just like it sounds, is the ability to know what feeling an other person is having in that moment. It doesn't mean that we're feeling it, but we know what another person is going through. And cognitive is the basis of all empathy. Now, a great example of this happened to me, a few years ago. Unfortunately, it was my first bout of kidney stones. I'd never had them before. And that evening I had an attack and I was feeling pretty uptight in pain. And so I went to the emergency room and they did a number of tests. And after they'd done a number of tests, the doctor walks into the room and he sits down beside me and he asked me if I ever had kidney stones before. And I said no. And he says, look, I know you're in a lot of pain. And he said, I know you're probably very frightened too, having never had this before, but it's going to be fine. And then he went into an explanation of the tests that they'd done and he showed me where the stone was and the steps that I was going to take. That was a great example of cognitive empathy. He sat down, he wasn't necessarily feeling the fear that I felt. He wasn't necessarily feeling the pain, but he knew that and he acknowledged it and it was comforting. He also knew that because I'd never had this before, probably I was going to have a lot of fear, and he was right, he was able to name that. So cognitive empathy is the ability to know and name what another person's emotional state is. Now, the second form of empathy is emotional empathy. This takes the cognitive empathy one step further, and now we're having an emotional experience. It's really that true meaning of the word, moving into another person's feeling and beginning to feel what they are feeling. A few weeks ago, I had a very close friend of mine who found out that they were losing their job. Now, needless to say, they'd been with the company for a very long time, and they were talking about this experience, and coming to the surface with a lot of very different emotions. They were feeling anger and upset that why would they be let go? They were feeling fear because what's next? I'm a little older now. Will I be able to find another job? Will I be able to support my family? There was a sense of hopelessness. And so as I listened to them, I began to feel in myself some of those feelings. I could feel my body tensing up again when they talked about the injustice and feeling anger at being let go. I could feel myself welling up a little bit with tears when they talked about the fear that they had. That's a perfect example of emotional empathy. It's being present with another person and moving into their feeling, being able to feel what they are feeling. Now, as human beings, we're naturally set up to do this. That's why we survived. We have a mechanism within us which is called an open limbic loop. That means that our emotions are impacted by what's happening outside of our body. Now that's important because when you walk past someone, say who's upset and crying, you just don't keep walking past them. That moves you. You start engaging. And the emotion that they feel in the face, then you take in that emotion, and sometimes you as well start to configure your face, say for in this example by sadness, and you begin to feel sadness as well. It's the basis of empathy, and because we're designed to be empathetic, it helped with our survival as human beings. The final empathy is called compassionate empathy. This is now taking this emotional empathy and moving it even a little bit further. So what compassionate empathy is about is not only feeling what the other person's feeling, but then taking an action. It means doing something about it. And so a great example of this happened a few months ago. A friend was telling me that one of her closest friends had just moved to Washington, D.C. And after about a month in the city, they were feeling a little bit depressed and a little bit down. And so she went to visit her friend one Saturday, and she sat there and she listened to her friend about doubting if the move was correct, not knowing if they would make enough friends, not knowing if this was just the right thing in their life at this moment. What my friend did, first of all, was just listen to her and then said, okay, we're going to do something about this. She got out her phone, she looked up a movie that night, she booked one of her favorite restaurants, said, we're going out, we're getting out of this place, and you're going to see a little bit of DC, we're going to the movies, and he said, then we're going to have a meal and I'm going to invite some friends. That's compassionate empathy. Because not only was my friend feeling what her friend was feeling, but then she took the extra step and did something about it. So there's the three different types of empathy: cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. Now, how does it show up when a person doesn't have enough empathy? Well, you're going to be able to recognize this person because at times they may feel a little cold, a little distant. This person finds it's hard even to join in the happiness of other people's. You know, let's go back to that example of my kidney stones. Before that wonderful doctor came in and showed me some cognitive empathy, I had a nurse in the room before that who had zero empathy. She looked at me and she said, "Do you drink Diet Coke?" And here was me writhing in pain saying, "Why are you asking that?" She said, "Oh, that's what causes kidney stones. You know, you can't do that." And as I looked, I said, wow, that's the compassion and the empathy I'm going to get. Now, there's also too much empathy. This is the type of person who gets so enmeshed in the emotions of another person that the boundary between their emotion and the other person's emotion is very gray and is invaded. This also is a person who's deeply impacted by the thoughts and the opinions of other people. And so they change their opinions just to look good for the other person. So what we really need is not too little, not too much. What we really need is something in the middle, a balanced empathy. Why is it important? It's important because we know that leaders who show better empathy have a performance rate of 40% higher than other people. So there we have it. We know what it's like to have too little empathy, to have too much empathy, and we want to have just right in the middle. But how do we do that? Well, we have to grow and develop our empathy. And there's a great news for you. Empathy is not fixed. Empathy can be grown. So I invite you to watch the next video where I'll give you some simple steps on how you can expand your empathy and join those 40% of leaders whose performance is better because they show higher levels of empathy.